Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to Trailhead DX Day 2, 9:30. Appreciate all of you guys being here, and I know it's not easy to make a 9:30 on the second day, so thank you very much. We'll make this a very good presentation for you, informative. I see some familiar faces. I'm Kamyar, by the way, and we're going to talk about our user interface API and their significance to Lightning platform as a whole. But we can be the first to show you this slide today and let you know that Chris and I are going to talk about things that are going to be coming out either in summer release or future releases. And as with everything else that you hear, please make your business and purchasing decisions based on GA functionality, things that we have out there as generally available, as opposed to things that are out in the future. So again, I'm Kamyar. I'm the product manager for the user interface API as well as Lightning Data Service. We talked about that yesterday. And Chris is our architect in the Lightning Foundation area. And today, I'll recap for you. As I said, I've seen some familiar faces, so you probably have heard me talk about how we came up with the user interface API and their importance to Lightning platform. But I'll recap how it all fits in. We'll go into the benefits and the uses, as well as, obviously, we're going to spend a bunch of time demoing things that we are working on right now, and walking through some code in terms of how to use our API directly, since this is for advanced developers. So let's think about Lightning Platform. It's our next generation. It's awesome, it's fast, it's easy, and it's fun. And the reason for that is because we have made an effort to design a platform that is built on top of a technology stack that is public to all of our developers at each layer. So whether you're an advanced developer and you're sitting here, or an analyst who doesn't really know how to write a bunch of code, we have tools for you to make you successful. And that's really significant because I don't think there's any other company that does that, especially the way we do it, which is the areas that we own. Our internal teams that build features use the same set of services and API that is exposed to you. And there's not a lot of companies that have that kind of policy when it comes to building their platform or their user interfaces, where you essentially build your API, you expose that, and then your customers and your partners have the same level of access as your internal developers. So how many people here have actually built on top of Salesforce platform using API? Okay, there's a fair bit. And I'm sure as you've done that with our existing API, you've often wondered, wow, I wonder how they built this feature in their app, because I can't figure out how to use API to do that. And that used to be the case. But as we give you the new app dev platform that's part of Lightning, we're essentially taking the mystery out of that, so that you can actually see how we build our own UI and give you the API and the services that you need to do the same thing, or if you want to change it and adapt it to your business or your app if you're a partner, you can do that fairly easily. So here's our little architecture diagram, whatever texture diagram you want to call it. And I've highlighted where user interface API fits in. It is part of the services that we have that is the integration layer between Lightning and our core platform, which is the #1 database in the cloud. It's the metadata-driven declarative platform that many of you have been using for years. And you have made a lot of investments in setting up your orgs with a bunch of metadata, and we are taking those and using them to give you higher level API and services to build apps and UI easier. So, as I said, I'm responsible for the user interface API and the Lightning Data Service product. And Lightning Data Service builds on top of user interface API. So the user interface API are public REST API. You go, they're all documented. You could look at the JSON. And what we do with Lightning Data Service is for our Lightning developers, for those who want to build apps or customize Lightning experience or Salesforce One, we offer additional benefit and service called Lightning Data Service that uses the API and does their serialization, deserialization, as well as caching for you. So that when you're building apps or components in the client, you don't have to worry about, oh, I have to take my JSON, I have to figure out a way to cache it because I don't want to have to constantly go over the network. And it's really valuable, and it's a lot of time that you have to spend doing that. It also means that if we don't do that work, all of you have to do that work, and all of you essentially end up with like duplicate code of each other, which is not good. So our job is to do it once, and then expose it as API so that you can all benefit from it, just as our internal developers benefit from it. So what are some of the benefits of using the API directly? Let's say, again, we encourage you, if you want to build inside of Lightning, to use Lightning Data Service. But a lot of times, as partners, as customers, you want to have a unique experience for your users because of your business process, or if you're a partner, you want to build apps on top of Salesforce. So you need to be able to customize things. And what that means is you might have, let's say, an app in Lightning that you're using with Lightning Service, but you also want to have your own mobile app that perhaps uses React Native or iOS, or you've written it for Android, and you want to quickly build this app and expect the functionality in your app to mirror what you've done for Lightning using Lightning components. And when you're going through the same set of API, that takes the surprise out of it. Because a lot of the business logic, a lot of the handling of things like access checks and who has sharing rights to a record and all the complex metadata handling that a lot of you who've worked with Apex have to do yourself. We do that at the API layer, so that if you're using our API directly, or if you're in Lightning and using Lightning Data Service, it's essentially going through the same thing. And again, no surprises. You expect a consistent experience out of the API. So why don't we turn this over to Chris, and he'll show you a few demos, as well as go through some of the code that we've written that uses the API directly in React Framework.
Sure. Hello. So we put up a couple sample apps. These are some quick links to them, and they're on GitHub as well. You can take a look. It's at force.com/recordviewer. And then the React Native one is at recordviewer native. So if we log on to Salesforce and just take a look at a sample opportunity, here's how that opportunity looks in Lex, all your fields and values and such. And to get exactly the same thing, if we go to, this is a server running that sample app. If we go here, that just made a single API call. It pulled in the layout, presentational information. It pulled in the entity metadata as object info, and it pulled in the record data that power that. So if we take a look at the JSON here, you can see we got an aggregate result that has an E tag for the whole thing. It has a layout map that has an individual layout that's in a form that's really easy to consume when you're building a UI. It has all the layout sections, it has rows, and it has items in them. This can express layout items that are based on fields, and also non-field things like Canvas and Visualforce that you can embed in Lex layouts. It includes this object info for both the target entity, in this case is opportunity, and some of the entities that are foreign keyed from that, so you don't have to make a bunch of additional calls after. And it includes the record data for this particular record. So that was all made from one XHR, and it's enough information to render this whole thing. And you can ask for things in different form factors. So if you pass in small to the endpoint, then you get a small version of it. So this matches what you would see in the Salesforce 1 mobile experience. So if you take a look at the layout for this object, I think it's that. Oops. Okay. Yeah. Can I do it in here? Crap. Where was the layout editor again?
Yeah, it's right there. Click simple.
Yeah,
Oops.
Sorry. Here?
Where'd it go?
I don't know. They moved it.
Yeah, there you go. It's click simple.
There we go.
Product managers adding value.
Yeah.
It's
So
not all about coding, guys.
if we move the description field down to under the contact email, and let's move the name down above the account name, for example, and hit save. Then if we go back to our opportunity in Lex, you'll see that
You have to refresh.
yeah. So the name moved down and description moved down. If we go over here and reload this, then the name moved down, description moved down. So you get everything, just make a new call. We are doing all the synthesis of describe calls and all SOQL. We're just doing it all for you. You just get one response back. So if you take a look here, we also support updates and clones in the UI API. So clone is pretty interesting because it will fill in entity-specific stuff. So in the Lex UI, sometimes when you clone things, depending on the entity, they'll fill in fields certain ways. Like if you're cloning a case that's already in process, then it'll set the status to new, things like that. So you get the same behavior you see in clone in Lex, you get here. So I'd call this out. Oops. Yeah, so here's our new one. And another thing that we do is we support creating a new record. And when you make this call, we return you a payload. I'm not sure if this is shown here. Yeah, we return you a payload that has defaults filled in. So in the UI, sometimes you'll see when you make something new, Lex fills in default values for some of the fields. We give you a response that has those filled in for you. So your UI can match the SFX UI directly. So then if you take a look at one of the cool new things that we've done is one of the things that folks sometimes have trouble with is dealing with dependent pick lists. So if we go to, I think it was accounts. Yeah. If we go to an account, this account has a fun set of dependent pick lists. So if I change the state, then the city gets reset. If I change the country, then the state and city changes, things like that, right? And that's traditionally been kind of hard to deal with as an API client. So in here, at the first level, what we give you is in the object info about this account, we include a dependent fields tree. So you can see here it shows country. Under country, it has language and state or province, and under that it has city. So we give you this kind of complete metadata about the tree of relationships amongst the dependent pick lists. Then in the fields themselves, we provide the controller name for the controller field above it. And the really cool thing is we added last release, when I go to edit mode here, we have a new endpoint that retrieves you all the pick list field values for one record type of an entity. So we made this one XHR to get to that, and it tells me that, where is it? It tells me that language has French and English and Spanish, and they're controlled by these controller values on the controller field. So it's pretty simple. And you can see in the sample code, we've created a dependent pick list graph editor. So if I just click one of these, you know what all the fields are, and you know the values and their relationships. So you can do something that's really similar to what Lex does pretty easily. So that's pretty neat, and that came out in the spring release?
That came out in spring. Yeah.
So if you want to take a look at the code, like I said, it's on force.com/recordviewer. And this sample is written in React with Redux and all kind of fancy new stuff. So these are the requests that we're making out. So the main one to get a record is record fetcher here. So you just put together /record UI, a record ID, and you give it form factors and modes. And then it is the right project. Yeah. And just pass us the OAuth, and we give you the information back. And then the real trick here is that we just have a little helper that's taking that thing that came back, that aggregate JSON, and it's going through, pulls out the object info, pulls out the record data, and then we just lap through all the sections in the layout. And then in each of the sections, we go through all the rows, and then we just put together a little state model for each of the items if they're a field. Then we just, assemble a little bit of an object and render it in the React component over here, like that. So it's not a lot of code, and that's that one single request doing that whole, getting everything you need for that one page. And there's some other stuff in there, like the code that we use to retrieve the list of objects that you can create, and there's sample code around, this is how we get the pick list values. So you just ask us in a GET request to get the object info / entity name / pick list value / record type, and that's what gives you back all those pick list values. Yeah, just take another look just for a sec, and just to prove to you, in here, oh, whoa. When I go to this page, take a look at the XHR that was used, and there it is, single XHR. Oops. It did respond. Oops, sorry. Oh, that one's probably cache. Yeah. Go to Camir's newly remodeled house. Then you can see, oh, I'm having bad luck today. There. So this is the one request that we made for that. With, there you go, and the JSON that we got back. So yeah, that's the sample app showing off the UI API, covering records, layouts. We have some list functionality around list views and lists of lists now, and clone defaults and create defaults and pick list values.
Great. So let's go back to the presentation. So thank you, Chris. We saw quite a few things, and I'll talk about them and their significance as we recap the endpoints that are generally available. But if I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Salesforce. We have many APIs that are focused for specific things. If you're adding metadata or if you're working with metadata, you know about our tooling API. If you're doing integrations, you know about our existing enterprise API. For us, it's important to note why we built this. And I think, as you can tell from the name, it's meant for building user interfaces. And that's what we've really focused on. And it's important because we talk about the number of XHRs, or we talk about e-tags. And those things are relevant when you are building applications, whether they're web pages, off-platform, like let's say you're building a page in Heroku, or if you're building mobile apps, it's important to cut down the number of API calls that go back and forth over the network. And then once you figure out the information that you need, you want to get it as quickly as possible. And then you also don't want to get duplicate information every time you go to the server because of just the network traffic that it generates. So that's where the e-tags come in. The e-tags are values in the header that you pass in on a subsequent API call that then we use to tell you if information changed or not. So if you're caching or if you're not caching, using the e-tags, for example, will tell you whether the information that you're already showing, for example, that layout, if the fields didn't change, you don't want to have to reload the whole page, right? It makes your application slower. So you use e-tags as a way to find out if data or metadata was static or changed, which makes your app much more responsive and a lot faster. But the really cool thing is, if you've worked with the API, if you're trying to build an app that actually honors our metadata, so when Chris showed you how he went in and moved fields around, everybody here knows how that works. It's our page layout editor, and it's one of the things that people use a lot when they're configuring and they're setting up their org, because they go in by profile and record type and customize the page for their specific users. And it's difficult to implement that in another UI or in a mobile app because you have to constantly check your metadata to see what the latest layout is. And we've made that really, really easy with this API. As you saw, you write your code so that as fields move around or as fields get added or removed, your app just handles it without you having to essentially publish a new version or do all these extra API calls to go get layout information and reconcile it. So the other important thing is what to not use this API for. So they're very targeted to the user interface, which means that we do things that are efficient for that, such as working with a collection of fields that are on a layout, for example. But as many of you well know, you can have an object, whether it's a standard object like account, case, etc., or a custom object that has hundreds, if not thousands, of fields. But not every user sees the entire object and all the fields that are on it, right? You make your users' lives simpler and more efficient by using layouts and record types to show them just what they need to work with. And what that means is that if you're building system integration, the user interface API are working with layouts, those field collections, because we want to optimize for the user interface. But for integration, you actually need to know the entire list of fields, right? So we don't really recommend it for that. And we think that our existing API, the enterprise API, are much better suited for that. The other thing, as I mentioned, is, and the reason I also am the product manager for Lightning Data Service, is if you're building in Lightning, you're actually using the user interface API, and we're just doing extra stuff for you because you're within the Lightning family through Lightning Data Service. So definitely use Lightning Data Service if you want to build custom applications or custom UI in Lightning experience. And then one of the other things that we need to do with this API is, for our support policy, we want to be able to deprecate these API after 3 years. And the reason for that is we cache a lot of the metadata that you get, which is what makes it really, really fast compared to our other APIs. So when you go get a layout, we actually cache that layout for the users that use it, or the object metadata information. And so if we support the API forever, as you can imagine, our cache just totally blows out because inevitably people don't update their apps. And because, again, this is meant for user interfaces, you want to keep your user interfaces fresh, right? You want to go in and update it, and we settled on 3 years, which is our standard API support policy. So let's talk about some of the things that we already have out there as generally available. The first version that was GA'd a couple of releases ago supported objects and records. That was our focus. We have functionality that don't exist in other API, such as the clone values and the default values that Chris showed you. The user interface API is really the only way if you want to have an API that gives you clone functionality and default values through the API response when you're creating. We also put a lot of effort in pick lists and dependent pick lists because they're probably one of the most popular metadata items throughout our platform. I mean, our customers have millions of pick lists, and it's something that everybody uses extensively with record types. And the dependent pick list was quite a challenge. And I saw a few faces when we showed the overlay that lays out the graph for you. That doesn't exist anywhere else. And it is something that's unique to our API, and it's going to be made available through Lightning components as well. And it's something that a lot of our customers have been asking for, because it's tough for users who are working on a record with a bunch of dependent pick lists that could be in a tree or a graph or various hierarchies to know which one they're supposed to pick first so that the other dependent values change. And by putting it all in that one modal that pops up and in the one API response, it's a huge benefit to you as the developers. The other thing we've done is we actually support files and child relationships. So if you're working with entities that have lookups and dependent lookups, we make it easier for you to essentially find out all the other records that are related to the one that you're getting through our API. Lists are super popular, so we had to focus on making lists available for you. And to start talking about future functionality. So all the stuff that I showed you is already available as part of our winter and spring releases. And what we're doing for summer that you can look forward to are to complete out the list functionality. So you already have the ability to get list data and metadata. So you can get a list of records for a particular list view, and it's paginated, so you have paging, which is really useful. And then you also have the ability to get the list metadata, which tells you the columns and the sort order, et cetera. What we're adding in our upcoming summer release is basically the list of list views. So you need an API that tells you for this user what are all the lists, so that you can then use that to go get the individual list view and its records. As well as the most recently used list of records, which is normally the one that you land on by default when you visit an object, like if you look at our UI. And then we're also rounding out, like if you think about our application and the different aspects of it in the UI, we're essentially going through and making public all the different things that you see on the screen. So we talked about lists, we talked about record home, we have the global navigation at the top. That's going to be a public API, and we want to make that available to you as well. Next, after that, we're going to go start working on related lists because everybody loves related lists, and it's pretty complicated to work with. So we want to bring that into the family, as well as for partners that use field sets. Actually, who here uses field sets? Aha, cool. So field sets are very, very popular for partners and customers who want to build Visualforce pages that have kind of I don't want to call it a layout. It's, again, a collection of fields that they want to make sure are on that page so they can lock it with a field set, or they want to make sure that they have a way for an admin to be able to add and remove some fields to that Visualforce page without actually having to go into the code. And so we want to bring that to Lightning so that you can leverage your existing field sets with Lightning components as well as with API. And since this is all built on a stack, we have to do the API work first before we would build it into Lightning Data Service, and then the Lightning components that give you the field sets that show you the collection of fields within it. So those are some of the things you can look forward to in our upcoming releases. And you saw some code and documentation. We have our Git repository. We showed you the links for that. But in April, we're also going to add a Trailhead module. It's pretty comprehensive. It covers a lot of the things that we just talked about. And look forward to that. It's coming. And that's the little badge right there in the middle. But if you want to get a head start, there's other Trailhead modules, like for working with API in general and auth and things like that. So if you're just getting started, if you go through and do that work, it'll just get you up and running faster because we use the same infrastructure, for example, with OAuth and connected apps and so forth for our API as well. All right. Questions?
Please use the microphone.
Please come and use the microphone so everybody can hear.
I saw that the child relationships were generally available, but then in the coming soon you had the related lists. I thought they were one and the same, or how are they different?
So the difference between child. So the question is, you saw on our roadmap of items that we're making available, those are the related lists that are not available yet. But then we said that there are some things that are generally available, and those are called child relationships. So the difference between child relationships and related lists are that you can actually set up, and we have built-in functionality at Salesforce that does this, like, for example, tasks, when you have many-to-many relationships. Or if you build custom application and use custom objects, you can use Schema Builder to do many-to-many relationships or join tables and things like that. So related lists are the straight parent-child relationships. And so if you go into an account, you have a list of opportunities. That's a direct parent-child, and you have a list of opportunities that you want to view in a list format with pagination, et cetera. Child records are, the former that I explained, where you have either a join table or a many-to-many relationship where you have to essentially traverse that junction object or junction list before you get to the actual child record. And what we've done in our API is we've actually denormalized that. So you can go straight from your top level, from your current record to the actual child record without needing to sort of go through the intersection. That builds the relationship for you.
But you can also see the junction table as a child object for the parent, right?
If you want to, yes. If you want to see the junction table itself.
And so that could be considered as a related list too, right?
Yes, that is indeed a related list.
Okay, so the junction object is not accessible, but the actual child record is accessible right now. Is that?
Yeah, we just felt like for building UI, you probably don't care about the junction table. You just want to know this account is related to this other thing that you have related through that junction table or junction list in between.
Okay.
Yeah. Just less SOCL work for you. Because ordinarily you have to use SOCL to do the join yourself to get the actual child records.
Probably when you're saying related list, it means that the columns on the related list are not available yet, but the fact that it exists.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, next question.
I was late. I'm not sure whether I missed that part. Like, I have not seen anything related to lookup filters. Like, so do we support that? Or, I looked at it like a couple of months back, but
Are you talking about dependent lookups?
just you will say I have a lookup and I added a lookup filter in my
Yeah, so we support
app.
dependent lookups. That was actually made available. It's definitely public. I'm trying to think if we made it available in winter or spring. I'm pretty sure it was winter. So you should be able to work with dependent lookups when you're trying to associate, the relationship between lookup
No,
fields.
I'm talking about lookup filters. So for lookups, we can specify like, hey, what is a filter for a lookup? So is there are you saying like I can get that filter details in any of these APIs?
I don't think that you
No,
can.
I don't think we have the filter information yet.
Okay, is it in our roadmap or something or like?
We should talk to the lookup people about that.
Yeah, we'll have to talk to our search team
Oh, okay.
to find out what their plans are.
Yeah, because right now we use that, but like there is no way that we can filter out based on whatever it has been said.
Okay.
So, okay. And all these API, it counts under API limits, right? Whatever.
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. So the question was, how does the API limits work for the user interface API? It's the same org limits. So if you have API limits and you use our other API, we decrement against that bucket of limits. But the advantage of user interface API is we only count one for each API call. So if you use some of our aggregate endpoints that get you data and metadata, or even some of the metadata endpoints that really require, if you're using our other API, 3-4 different API calls, you still just get the one. So it's almost like, API sale.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know how to put this. So it looks like the development roadmap is user interface API first, and then Lightning Data Service next.
And
Again,
then components.
and then the components, right? Going back to, I don't know if you remember yesterday's question in LDS about dependent pick list. Right now, the dependent pick list feature is already available in the user interface API, but it's not yet available in LDS. So I know there's an internal implementation, but this also puts people who are developing in Lightning at a disadvantage because they're still waiting, whereas the folks who develop custom apps outside of the Salesforce interface or ecosystem can benefit faster. That, to me, looks a bit counterintuitive. I would think that Lightning Component and like LDS development features would be made available quicker so that the ecosystem can benefit first. I mean, that's why it's like, I don't know how to put this.
I hear you.
It really depends on the features that we're working on. So, the Lightning Data Service team has a lot of stuff that they've been working on lately, so they just haven't had time to get to some of those things. But definitely, we try to do as much of the stack at once as we can when it's.
Yeah. There is going to come a time where we're going to sync it up. Again, it's hard because different teams have different backlogs, even if you're the product manager for the same teams.
Sure, yeah.
But the product answer to your question is we love all of our developers. So I don't want to penalize the advanced developers by holding back the REST API that we already have
Right.
because it's not available in Lightning because those teams are busy building other stuff, which are equally important. So for example, for those of you who were at the Lightning Data Service session and you saw the video at the end for the feature where we notify components when server-side changes happen or changes by other users happen, actually the bulk of that work was done by the team that owns the user interface API because it's all on the server, that notification system. And then we just leverage the existing Lightning Data Service auto-notify functionality. So we have like, oh, we've actually gone over.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go stand in that corner. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And if you have more questions, Chris and I are happy to answer them.
Thanks a lot.